Good morning and welcome to today's webinar on values and purpose in the workplace. This week, Hi Bob and Happy Maven have been working together to celebrate International Happiness at Work Week and do what we can to spread a bit of joy across all of your workplaces by sharing some actionable initiatives that you can get up and running with the focus on just making people a little bit happier throughout their working day. And this morning's session it's a really nice way to finish that week. We're looking at values and purpose, which is, of course, the underlying essence behind everything that happens within your offices and a great way to keep us focused. So if you're not familiar with Hi Bob, we are a people management platform which provides HR software along with a real focus on employee experience and culture. And today we're really privileged to have Suki Bassi from Happy Maven with us. And I'm going to hand over to Suki now. He will give you a quick overview of Happy Maven and then get straight into the values and purpose session.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you to the wonderful team at Hi Bob for organising all of this and having you all on the call. And I'd like to thank you all for carving out this time so that you get to invest in your own development and in the development of your team, your colleagues and your workplace. And I hope that this session adds value in some way, that it contributes to an understanding of just how important our personal values are, but also how they contribute to our working lives, to our professional lives, and how they add to our sense of professional achievement, and also to our human connectedness, and of course to our overall happiness. Very recently, I had quite an animated and enthusiastic conversation about belief, and somebody asked me what I believe in. And I believe in people, individually and collectively, in people's power to transcend our circumstances, to surpass all expectations, to do pretty awesome things. And the fact that we as individuals have agency and we have responsibility for our actions and for our contribution. So essentially, what I'm saying is we have an inner driver, a purpose. And the path to recognizing my own purpose, let alone owning it, has pretty much taken a lifetime. And I'm sure it will continue to surprise me until my very last breath. And so today, we have quite an unusual webinar in that I'd like to share a little bit of that journey with you today. Some of the detours, some of the experiences, some of the motivations, some of the surprises, that bring me here today, and I'd like to give you a brief introduction to the Japanese concept of Ikigai. So today's session will be roughly in two sections. First, my personal journey, a masterclass in possibly how not to do things, and the second section will cover how you can help to tap into your own values to inform your personal and professional decisions. And of course, there'll be time for questions at the end, and I really welcome your perspectives and your feedback. So it's because I so passionately believe in people and what we're capable of. And when I say what we're capable of, it's when we have the right conditions to thrive. And this is why I do the work that I do. And this is why I find myself on this webinar with you. Whether it's the paid work, the pro bono work, the advocacy work, I believe in the potential of individuals and the magic of collaboration. Across all of your personal and professional lives, you all contribute in an individual way, but you help to create something bigger than the sum of its component parts. You harness that synergy to transform ideas into reality. You make that happen. And if we're able to bring our whole selves to work, what potential does that have? How could that amplify the magic? We spend more time at work than anywhere else. So I run an employee wellbeing business, advocating and benefiting and evidencing the benefits of bringing the whole self to work, the benefits for you as individuals, for teams, for companies, the benefits on productivity, on creativity, on engagement, on profit, and of course, on our sense of mental health and our well-being. And I think any of you that know me will know that I'm an unapologetic and unabashed champion for this change. And even amongst my pro bono commitments, one of the things I'm on is the board of an arts charity. We work with young people and communities that have low engagement with the arts. Some of them have no access even to public libraries. We work with them to make theatre, to make music, to unleash the transformation that art and collaboration can bring. And as well as my wellbeing advocacy, I make no apologies for constantly challenging what we think is acceptable. It's always important for us to interrogate the status quo, and that includes in our workplaces. 30 years ago, smoking in offices, on public transport, on planes was unremarkable. The dangers of passive smoking were evident, were well known, yet pretty much all environments were smoking by default. It took a force of will and political action to challenge and eventually overturn that norm. And so my mission is to put employee wellbeing firmly on the policy agenda, to challenge and overturn the accepted norm that we need to be a template version of ourselves at work, a different person at work than we are from our personal lives. And all good origin stories start in childhood, and mine started with seva. Now, seva is a Punjabi Sanskrit word, and it's one of the basic tenets of the Sikh faith. And it pretty simply translates as service. It's essentially service, service to God, service to others, service to the community. However, I internalized that concept not as service, but as sacrifice, that I needed to sacrifice self to serve others, that I needed to sacrifice self to redress inequality, to alleviate suffering. And I understood that sacrifice and service meant to focus and fix the big stuff. So naturally, I found myself drawn to human rights work. So my first role when I moved to London, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, was to work with an organisation called African Rights. I joined them, one second, it's on slideshow, yeah. I joined them less than 2 years after the end of the Rwandan genocide, and we were tasked with gathering testimonies from the survivors to be used in the international criminal tribunals. The genocide, for those of you unfamiliar with Rwanda, was a coordinated and systematic attack by the Hutu majority population on their Tutsi countrymen. To come face to face with the true horror in graphic detail of what people are capable of in certain circumstances is indescribable. Neighbour on neighbour, priest on congregation, teacher on students. 100 days where a country manifested the deepest, darkest depravity of what human beings are capable of. And throughout this 100 days, the world turned a blind eye. 2 years on, our teams sat with the survivors. We listened to their stories. We recorded their testimonies. We wrote up the transcripts. We translated them. We collated them into evidence, into articles, into books. And as you'll appreciate, this took its toll. It took its toll on me. But what I'd internalized was that it shouldn't matter because the work was so important. The work was more important than me, that I just needed to toughen up and to do better. A few years later, I was working for the YMCA with refugee communities in London, specifically working with asylum seekers escaping persecution. I worked closely with the Medical Foundation for the Victims of Torture, trying to get them very specific psychological and physiological support that they needed. We're talking about individuals who had survived so much but still had so many obstacles ahead, whether they were the health challenges that we're facing or the bureaucracy that presented itself. Their suffering was acute and real. And again, I had to do better. I had to be better. And this attitude that I needed to toughen up and to do more, continued to take its toll. And at the same time, don't think that, across that decade, all of my roles were that dark. I ran a phenomenal project to support and mentor lone parents back to work. But as you probably guessed, the martyr gene is strong in me, so even that wasn't that straightforward. It was a high-stakes political hot potato, and as it was a government-funded pilot project, there were vested interests for it to fail. And I needed to do this work for the lone parents, for their children, for the opportunities that could present themselves. So I had to work harder, I had to toughen up, I had to do better. I saw my lack of resilience as a shortcoming, my pain as a failure. I was drawn, like many of us are, for searching for answers to fix myself, for some magical solution that was going to toughen me up. A belief that something would present itself if only I travelled widely enough, if I read deeply enough, if I worked on myself enough, these answers would come. I'll remember my first trip to India as an adult. I went on a Western journey of self-discovery because surely there's answers in the wisdom of the East. I was in a taxi leaving the airport at dawn, with that wide-eyed wonder that you have when you're searching for answers and solutions. And I saw a small crowd of people waiting patiently. And of course, I was in India, so I was tapping into the divine. I turned around and I asked the taxi driver, what are they waiting for? Are they waiting to do puja? Are they waiting for the temple to open? He looked at me in the rearview mirror, and I don't know whether I'm imagining the side eye that he gave me. And he said, no, madam, they're waiting for the bus. It's a bus stop. And even anecdotes like that didn't stop me from continuing to look for these answers in the East. And a few years later, I even moved to India to set up a yoga retreat and work with an anti-trafficking organisation rescuing women and children from domestic and sexual slavery. Work that was harrowing and fraught, but in an environment where there was so much love, laughter, learning, and generosity. And I've got goosebumps even talking about this. For the first time in my life, I felt plugged into the grid. I was in flow, a conduit for something bigger and better than me. Unfortunately, life doesn't always pan out how you want, and my personal circumstances meant that I had to leave India and come back to England in a hurry. So even though I knew something magical had happened, I didn't have time to unpack it. I didn't have time to reflect because I was thrown into the circumstances that brought me back to England. I just put that positive feeling and those fond memories down to the children and the transformational organisation that I'd worked with. And as is our way, in time I got back onto the change the world hamster wheel. And dotted in between was me trying every single therapy. Those of you familiar with the TV series Absolutely Fabulous will recognise some of this. I tried yoga, flotation tanks, feng shui, juice cleanses, Ayurveda, even a few inspirational tattoos. Pretty much you name it, I tried it to fix myself. And this is what I repeatedly did. I believed that the stuff that added value, that contributed to change, was the hard stuff. It's the stuff that leaves scars. It was the stuff where I sacrificed and lost a part of myself. It took a full-on breakdown for me to realize that you can make a difference without compromising your well-being, without fracturing yourself. It took a full-on breakdown for me to realize that I did make a difference, but not quite in the way that I thought I did, and not in the way that I thought I should. A full-on breakdown that forced me to examine my very sense of self. Being invited to collaborate on the Conversations for Change toolkits for the Tutu Foundation was the beginning of my awakening that there are other ways to live and work. And I say beginning because I was really strongly attached to my old patterns of martyrdom, and occasionally they still show their little heads. Conversations for Change build upon the philosophy of Ubuntu. It's essentially a philosophy that recognizes each other's shared humanity. So what it means is I'm only okay if you are okay. And from that point, we can collectively accomplish much from building upon what binds us rather than we focus on what separates us. It's essentially the philosophy that was used in South Africa for the peace and reconciliation process. We know what fractures us, we know what separates us, but if we start from what our shared humanity wants, we've got something to build upon. Helping to create this toolkit to be used in the UK, and then being invited, not helicoptered into disadvantaged communities across England to share the programme was a revelation for me. For the second time in my life, I felt I was plugged into the grid. This transcended any notion of work. It wasn't work. I was just a conduit and the work flowed through me. It was the first realization that the magic I brought happened in the spaces. It happened with the human connections that I made, the support I had given other people, the conversations, the space I had held for them. Now, the irony is that this is something I had been told my whole life by friends, by family, by teachers, by colleagues, even strangers on the bus had told me this was where my magic was. But I attached no value to it, not because I didn't respect their opinions. I attached no value to it because it was easy, because I loved it, because I loved people, because it was just who I am. For me to realize that it wasn't collating the testimonies into evidence for the International Human Rights Tribunal, though of course that was critical and important, it was the listening, it was the holding the space for the survivors to share their stories. That is where the power was. That was where my power was. At the YMCA, it was implementing communal lunches where staff, service users, local residents sat and shared meals and stories. At Odenadi, the anti-trafficking organisation, it was creating play, drama and art with the girls. It was sharing time and stories and smiles. My superpower was kind of just being me. So essentially now all I do is I have conversations. Yes, what I learn from those conversations will underpin corporate strategy. It will be codified into policies or implemented into well-being initiatives backed up by serious data and metrics. But fundamentally, I listen to people. Or today, when I'm invited, I speak to people. And this brings me to the second part of today's webinar, the concept of Ikigai. Now, I wish I had found this concept 20 years ago. Would have saved me a lot of scars and tattoos and heartache. So an ikigai is essentially a tool to capture your reason for being and for building on finding your useful purpose. I love it because it takes something that can be so abstract and simplifies it. The purpose of life is not happiness, it's usefulness. Happiness cannot be a goal in itself, it's a byproduct. And if purpose is the path to happiness, this is pretty much a great place to start. There's a quote from Waldo Emerson which says, "The purpose of life is not to be happy, it is to be useful, to be honourable, to be compassionate, and to have life make some difference." Are we okay with the deck?
We are.
Fab. And that brings us neatly onto our values. Oh, sorry, I've just lost my own notes.
I will just say, if there has been any problems with the slides, we've just seen a couple of comments saying some of you have only been seeing one. We will share all of these at the end.
And so for us to even start looking at our ikigai, we need to unpack our own personal values. And what are personal values? I was giving a talk yesterday when someone actually commented that there weren't any values in their company. We all have values. We all bring our personal values to everything that we do. Personal values are the things that are important to us, the characteristics and behaviours that motivate us and guide our decisions. Values are essentially our true north when we know that we are fully aligned. Our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions are aligned. And with more and more businesses recognising that an alignment of their people's values with corporate goals is a win-win approach, how can we help identify what matters most to us and to our colleagues? So essentially, we can take a grassroots approach to shaping our corporate culture by identifying our core and our common goals. Professor Morten Hansen, in his 2018 book, Great at Work, defines purpose this way. You have a sense of purpose when you make valuable contributions to others, be that individuals or organisations, or to society that you find personally meaningful and that don't harm anyone. Well, our purpose is a reflection of our core values, and you can feel more purposeful at work when your everyday behaviours and decisions are aligned to those values. As individuals, bringing our passion and purpose to work can mean asserting ourselves in formulating and conducting our day-to-day tasks, connecting with what we truly believe in and care about, rather than just passively embracing the status quo. So how do we start? How do we do this? Well, normally I like to end a talk by sharing quick wins. However, the truth is, when it comes to aligning our useful purpose, it's a practice. For those of you who practice yoga or play a musical instrument or enjoy sport, or you're currently studying for a qualification, you will know exactly what I mean. It is a practice. It's practice plus the openness to ask for help or direction, to seek out coaches and mentors and feedback, to embark on this development journey, knowing that you can't possibly have all of the answers. And put it this way, it'd be no fun otherwise. So you've got to start with your own values. You've got to know them, you've got to own them, and you've got to live them. And then you consciously prioritize them and ensure that they're embedded into what you do. Think closely and deeply about what events and experiences allow you to feel and connect with your values most deeply. As I said before, our personal values are fundamentally our true north. We all know when we've executed something that just doesn't sit right. It's recognizing that and responding to that. And I know it does sound, that it sounds complicated, but it's simpler. It's simple. You know yourself best. Start there. Check in with yourself. Keep a journal. Recognize repeating themes. One thing that I highly recommend to everybody is a WWW journal, a what went well. That time that you spend every day, even if it's as little as 3 minutes, to reflect on what went well, the positive feedback that you've received, the stuff where your colleagues, your line managers, your friend, that stranger on the bus have said something. Capture that and you'll start seeing emerging themes. The reality is our superpowers are the things that we naturally knock out of the park. It's that intersection of our core strengths and our passions. Look for those themes. What have past experiences shown you? What have people always consistently complimented you on? And like I said about being plugged into the grid, also think about your passion moments, the times in your life when you felt invincible. Whether that's a work project, whether that's a collaboration, whether that was caring for someone, exploring a new place, or even cooking a meal. It's that alignment you feel at your core when you're in true flow. And when I say it's an intersection of your true values becomes your superpower, once you back that with your passion, that's where the magic happens and that's where the adventure begins. And the last one that I've said is be the one you. And I'm so sorry to share this with you, but that is simultaneously the easiest and the hardest one to do. We are taught from a very early age that we need to wear different hats, that we have to be different people in different environments. And of course, in different scenarios, we will play to different strengths. But the reality is we need to be able to do that without dissonance. We need to be congruent to be in flow. So think about the behaviors that you consider really, really important outside of work, whether that's gratitude, appreciation, kindness. Let's not park them at the office door. When you open your laptop, put those little reminders there too. And those are the behaviors, and even the behaviors that we learn at work, whether that's accountability or development or learning. Let's take those home with us too. It's cross-pollination. Be comfortable about sharing your mistakes or your vulnerabilities. The reality is I've learned far more from my mess ups than I probably ever have learned from, the stuff that I did eat the first time round. So we need to actively embed these learnings, this culture of gratitude, kindness, and well-being wherever possible. And invest that in yourself, because at some point you'll be grateful to have that internal resource to draw on. So I'm going to end with saying your values are your superpowers, are your passion moments. That's your origin story, nobody else's, and the world needs your superpowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. That was really inspirational. And we've had a couple of questions come through as well. We talked at the beginning, you mentioned at the beginning quite a lot about becoming that change that you want to see. Can you recommend a good first step on that journey if you want to start becoming the change?
I think the one thing, like I said at the beginning, it's a masterclass on perhaps not how not to do things. We always think that change is external to ourselves. It's what we need to be doing in the world. But I would say the very first step is tapping into yourself. So start as simple as journaling, or to reach out to your nearest and dearest for feedback. And then you start in a place that's just more authentic.
So it all comes back to authenticity and being confident enough to know yourself. And you also mentioned on leaving India that you didn't necessarily have time to reflect on what had happened there and the magic that had occurred. How important do you think reflection is as a whole, and how do you go about it now?
I think reflection is absolutely critical, personally, professionally, within our friendships, within our interactions with other people. And so I would actually say to people, schedule that diary, that even if it's as little as 5 minutes a day. Some of the simplest journals can be capturing what went well, what didn't go so well, what would you do differently. And I was on a panel yesterday, and someone made a reference to we twice a day we take 2 minutes to clean our teeth, beginning of the day, at the end of the day. And I think things like our taking that time to reflect should be built in to our habits and to our routines, because you will also see emerging themes. So it isn't just a reflection of today. Regularly reflect back over the last few months, years. So the answers are already there.
Great, thank you. And just to kind of move back towards the workplace a little bit, talking about the values there, can you recommend any ways of getting the conversation started to look at beginning mapping the values, and how can we get a C-suite listening to the importance of having those values?
Well, why not start with C-suite? One of the exercises that Happy Maven do when we're mapping corporate values, when we're looking at building culture, is to actually crowdsource what are your personal values. There's no point helicoptering values in. So the very first exercise I would do with C-suite is an offsite, and it needs to be no longer than, say, 90 minutes of what are your personal values. What are the things which you prioritize and are fundamental to your sense of self? And then you will see, again, I keep using that same expression, you will see the emerging themes. People will talk about family, they will talk about transparency, they will talk about accountability, they will talk about trust, honesty. And once you've got everyone's core values, you will see what is common ground. And then your corporate values will emerge from that. Or you'll see there's a dissonance.
That sounds like a really powerful way of getting buy-in as well, because once you've got that C-suite's personal values, it's going to mean so much more to them than just, as you say, helicoptering some values in. And then just to finish, to look at the idea of purpose again, do you have any thoughts around whether a company's purpose should lean more towards the clients that it's servicing or the employees that it's nurturing, or is it a case of just getting the balance right across both?
That's a really good question. For many companies, there's got to be a balance, because at the end of the day, your people are your strength, and the input that they are going to have, even on your customer solutions, is irreplaceable. They are your services. But I think it is about balance.
And then, yeah, doing the best for everyone as you can. So thank you so much. We will share the slides, and we'll also share a summary of the conversation that we've had through this session and through everything else that we've discussed during Happiness at Work Week. And that will be emailed to everyone that's dialed in by the end of tomorrow at the very latest. So thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you all for joining the webinar.
Great, and we'll speak to you all soon at our next event. Thank you. Bye.